Hi, I'm Connor Winterton of Borrowing Tape, and I'm here today with Lucy Kerr, the director of the drama film Family Portrait. Thank you for joining us today, Lucy.
Thank you for having me.
So, firstly, I'd like to talk a bit about the production process. How long did principal photography take, and what was the experience like?
It was quite quick. It took about 2 weeks, I think a couple days, maybe a little bit more than 2 weeks, a couple days of rehearsal, about 12 days of shooting, and about a couple days off during the middle. Um, and that was in May to late May to June 2022. And it was really amazing filming experience that I think it allowed this unusual and kind of unusual film to come to life in the way that it did, because we were at my grandparents' house in the hill country in Texas. Their old house that they started in the 60s and then started build like expanding a little bit, where I would go for summers with my cousins and my parents and my aunts and my uncles. And now my grandparents have passed away, so we go there sometimes with the family, but because the family's so big, the schedule for the house is divided up into a couple weeks throughout the year. So you kind of have it's scheduled very rigidly, and not everyone can fit there at the same time. So it's kind of divided based on families. Um, so I was lucky to be able to get it for 2 weeks. So I don't think I'll have access to it for a while now. Um, yeah, so it was special shooting there, this place that I grew up going to that was so special to me, where the river is really beautiful next to the house, and it was really hot. It was like 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So after shooting, we would all go swim in the river, and that kind of connected us in a really powerful way, and also allowed us to stay at ease during the process of being in this heat together. And most of us were staying on the property. People were sharing rooms, everything. So it's had this really summer camp feeling to it, which and it allowed people to get to know each other better. And I think that allowed a lot of the actors who were playing family members but hadn't met before this, it allowed them to feel more comfortable with each other. And being contained like that also allowed us to improvise. So some scenes where you see one or two people in the shot throughout, at different places in the property, kind of in their doing their own thing, or having a moment by themselves. A lot of that was added to the script on set.
Okay, great. Thank you for telling us about that. It was really interesting. I was going to ask actually about the setting and where that was, but obviously you've explained that for us now, so that's great. And I've got a couple of questions that relate to some of the stuff you were saying there. So I'm going to go for your portrayal of family dynamics is intimate and complex. How did you work with the actors to develop these nuanced relationships on screen? That was my question, but I feel like you've already started to answer that through through some of the stuff you've already said. But is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think it was also like being very particular about the casting. I casted over like 2 years. I did the casting myself, and I wanted it to be a bit more open. Like I didn't want to go through people's agents and work with people that had had a lot of experience in film, um, were big names or something like that. I really wanted to feel the energy of the specific character in that actor, and also like discover people I wouldn't have met before. So I did like an open call, and yeah, it was they were amazing. It was really wonderful working with all of them, like particularly working with the sisters, because I have three sisters, and all of those sister dynamics were, I think, those four women got to really, yeah, they got to know each other there on set, and exploring, young women growing up with other young women. There's these kind of tensions you feel as how you support one another, but also how you might suppress one another. And I think we were all interested in that and exploring that together. Um, and also in the writing, I think it was important to create this um, believable family, or this like family, how people talk, true to, how people might talk when they're just hanging out at this place on vacation, gossip and things like that, rather than the language and the dialogue just driving forward a narrative. Instead, it creates like the atmosphere, it creates the texture of those characters in whatever specific things they talk about, even if it seems random and not relevant to the story. It creates that texture.
Yeah, definitely. And the realism as well. I was going to say that, some people have a theory that if you do get bigger name performers in a film, that sometimes can detract from a realism. And having perhaps people that you don't know so well adds to a sense of realism. And it's interesting to hear you talk there, because I was going to ask about how, if you like, autobiographical the film is, or if not that, your connection to the themes and the narrative.
Yeah, I think it's quite let's say, I guess, auto fiction, or um it is inspired by my own family, but the characters do diverge away from people in my family. Like the mom is quite different than my mom, and it was more her character was serving this particular story and family portrait rather than being an imitation of my mom or something like that. So, but it was a starting point, because my family makes this Christmas card every year that is always very extravagant and very clever, and and oh yeah,
That's
even people in my mom's social circle every year are like, oh, what's the cursed Christmas card going to be this year? And so it has like a joke and these things, but on the back there's always like a picture of everyone smiling together, and the picture that they were supposed to take on this holiday that never gets taken. So, and then the book that they have in their hands, with the red book with all the Christmas cards, that's my family's book as well. So yeah, it's inspired by this need to kind of represent the family each year, to show that there's been this lack of conflict, or showing that everything's good, and that as like an image representing that, and then what can happen when something makes that picture uh not when something undermines the process of taking the picture, then that representation crumbles. So that was that, yeah, that it came from my family a little bit like that, in terms of the Christmas card. And then there are anecdotes there throughout the film, like the World War II picture being appropriated like it was from Vietnam. That's something that happened in my family, my grandfather's picture, and little things that the sisters say about things that have happened to them in their life, or remember this or remember that. So that's peppered in there, but also it does. There are elements that dramatize this family and make the film its own thing, rather than just being a picture of my family.
Yeah, I thought I was what I was getting there it felt like there was this connection between like auto fiction and then these intellectual cerebral elements, right? So you're saying about the representation of the family. Representation is like something I'm really interested in generally, and the politics of representation, what representations do. So that was interesting to hear you saying that the how, what undermines that process, and then what might undermine that representation. And for me, I think this idea of a family portrait and what you were talking about there is so bound to American culture, for me anyway, because in
Yes.
Britain, we don't do those kind of Christmas holiday cards. It's something we see a lot of the time in American films. So I thought there was a connection there as well to American culture. So there's quite a lot of intellectual themes there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
that
definitely, yeah.
um and that leads me on to a couple of questions that I've been really um Excited to ask you, really. One of them might take me a little bit longer. It's one of those where you're going to be like, "Where is the question?" But I will get there. But my first one is, I thought the film had quite a unique take on the concept of like time and temporality. And the film's temporality, in a way, reminded me of something like Twin Peaks: The Return. It was almost
Hmm.
kind of subtly lynching, even though the film is, I don't really think it's broadly lynching. Just that aspect reminded me of Lynch's work.
Hmm.
Could you kind of elaborate on how you conceptualize that element of time and temporality and what you kind of hope to convey through that?
Yeah, I think that's what brought me to film in the first place was time. Because I was doing dance and choreography, which is a time-based art as well. Um, but it's more right, immediate, like right there in front, like and it you can manipulate time with performance, but it's sort of like you with film, it's more possible um to play with time. Um, and I think that's why I was always interested in more time-based art in general, rather than like I tried to do some drawings, I tried to do some sculptures at some point, but it's really how things unfold that always um, compelled me. Um, and so, yeah, I think, yeah, when I saw Beau Travail just sitting in the theater after it was over and was just like, wow, what just happened? Where was I through all that? This, you feel like the bird, like linear time, which is what we're like conditioned to experience, that we have our past, present, future, and we carry our past mistakes into the future. And it's kind of rooted in this in Judeo-Christian perception of time that we get judged. We keep continue in our life until we are judged at the end of the life for what we've done in the past. Um, so when I studied with this philosopher in undergrad, when I studied philosophy, she was writing a book about how music in time-based art form can lift that burden of linear time and you can experience time differently, like in like cyclical time. So that's what I've always been passionate about. And then with family portrait, early on, talking with my collaborators, Lydia the cinematographer, Carlos, my husband, and also write additional writer, and Rob Rice, the other additional writer. We're talking about this feeling of stupor, and it kind of came through because it seems like the family should be passing, like time is passing in real time, because there's like this realism, and it's like, okay, it's the morning and we're waiting to the picture and having these conversations. But then as this continues and people continue to resist Katie's telling them we need to take the picture now, you start to wonder what time space we're really in, and if time has become suspended and like into purgatory. So yeah, that was really exciting for me, and that was something I tried to keep from the very beginning of writing the film to the end of editing it. So that helped to root the film, because it obviously doesn't have much of a plot. So that was sort of my structuring thought. And then on set, sometimes I wondered, I was like, oh, is it okay that we have this shot here and the baby's there, and then the next shot in this film, the baby's like, this person's also has the baby over there, and the baby can't be in two places in once. But then we were sort of like, well, maybe it doesn't matter, maybe we'll shoot it so that it doesn't totally make sense how the baby got there from there to there, or why it's in two places at once, or it's not continuous. And that, I think, helps contribute to this like dream logic that David Lynch always inspired me so much for his use of like um, dream logic that felt wasn't just for the sake of weirdness, but felt rooted in its own logic also. Um, and yeah, definitely a fan. So.
Yeah. So you mentioned Beau Travail. I got very excited there because my next question actually mentions Beau Travail.
Oh.
But I was going to say that yeah, that kind of dream-like feel that the temporality adds to, very similar to David Lynch's work. That I actually have those dreams where you're trying to do something and something doesn't happen. And so it reminded me of that kind of, I think one reviewer had called it like a low-key fever dream. And it
Yeah.
definitely has that feel. But on the topic of feeling, whilst I was watching the film, I was reminded of a concept that was associated with Claire Denis' Beau Travail, which is the cinema of sensation, which the Criterion Collection had said in a piece that I've read recently. So it's kind of like the amplified sound of wind in the fields and the trees, the people talking over each other, the summery aesthetic, talking about food, the scene in the kitchen. And it feels like a very cinematic film, but obviously not in the way that like an action blockbuster is seen as cinematic, like Lord of the Rings or whatever. More so in its particular combination of certain sounds and images. And Jordan Mitzer, writing for the Hollywood Reporter, stated that the film is highly cinematic and also quite intoxicating. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit more, because you already started to talk about this, a bit more about this, and was this kind of affect and feeling, that idea of sensation, a desirable outcome for you?
It's definitely a desirable outcome, and I'm happy that it came through, because I don't think it's something you can intellectualize, like, oh, if I have this element like this and this element like that, it will make it sensorial. It kind of comes through in all the elements together, and this intuitiveness of how to combine them. But I think that, yeah, so I'm really happy people are picking up on that in the reviews, that it feels since sensorial and intoxicating. I think it can also feel a bit frustrating as well, but not many people is. But that's part of the point of it, is this continued soup of time, kind of like why they can't come together, like the constant being flow, like how she moves with them when she's taking them down to the river. They kind of always fall back out away off of her, so she tries to pull one down and they pull back, so it's like, saw them that kind of as like a flow of water that she's trying to pull in the direction that they can't go in.
Mm.
um
Very metaphorical
yeah,
as well, yeah.
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 um so yeah, I'm happy it all came through. And then sound, like when I saw La Cienega in my very like first week of grad school or something, I was blown away. And yeah, because it is so sensorial and it's so tactile, and the sound, of course, is such a big part of that, but also the bodies and how they're sort of laying horizontally and arrested in a way. um yeah, so I think, and then Beau Travail as well, the bodies and the movement. um and then so combining that, bodies, sound, and then also a language that suggests things that you don't see. So like the picture, you never see it, but you hear someone describe this picture, that brings images into your head as you watch it. And then you become more physically involved in the film because you're also imagining things. And that this all creates a more like three-dimensional physical experience, sensorial experience of it.
I thought I really came across as well whilst I was watching it, and that combination, as I said, of images and sounds. And I was reading an interview, I think it was a BFI did with Claire Denis when Beau Travail came out, and she said a really similar thing actually about this idea of not intellectualizing something and actually approaching a film in a way that's like, right, I'm going to make this art film. Perhaps doesn't always actually work if you approach it in that way. So it's interesting to hear you say a similar thing. And my final question is moving on to future projects. Which kind of other themes and subject matters interest you as a filmmaker? What might we see in the future?
Yeah, I have a couple films right now. One is more of like it's also based in Texas in 2004, about the same kind of milieu of people in Texas, about a debutante ball in Houston, and about a college sorority girl who is soon going to make her debut. the kind of Houston Country Club ball where they wear wedding dresses, they bow down to the floor, the father presents them for being married. But even though the original purpose is like presenting the woman as if she's ready now to be married, that's not, no, people ignore that, and they just, you know, keep it up for the sake of tradition and having a party. So, but yeah, it creates that ball as a more, it frames the ball as a more like occult and devotional and almost like religious things, and that's what I'm interested in bringing to that environment. um so also, yeah, feeling the body and the weight of the body bowing down and the sensorial aspect of it, and in the film the main character and her cohort, they appear to have become possessed or something. um that and another film that's more DIY, like smaller film, that's going to be based in more in like the Northeast, actually, in kind of a rural area, but I won't say too much about that one. And yeah, just, you know, it's such a privilege to be able to travel so much with Family Portrait, and for the film to have such a long life after finishing it after its premiere last year in Locarno. So I'm going to LA soon for screenings there, and yeah, enjoying the eventual eventually closing the circle on that film, and it's really beautiful. So I'm happy, very, very grateful.